My name is Kieran Prendergast. I am a former British diplomat. I was in the diplomatic service for 33 years, and then for 8.5 years I was the Under Secretary General for Political Affairs at the United Nations in New York under Kofi Annan. That is, if you like, the chief oncologist of the United Nations Secretariat, dealing with nasty conflict situations. I think you're in for a very prolonged period of instability and suffering in Syria. I don't think there are any particularly good options, because the only one that would pull Syria out of the current mess, which is a negotiated transition, is not one that seems to be very attractive to the government side, the regime at the moment, because they feel they're winning. And also because the pressure that would have to be brought does require that the West engage in serious discussions, not just with the Russians, but also with Iran, which has interests in Syria, as well as the other players, so that pressure is put on both sides to come to the negotiating table and to give up hope of a complete victory, and to go for to settle for a negotiated transition. Now, if that doesn't happen, I think the likelihood is for continued bloodshed, continued suffering, continued disruption and dislocation of people. Supply of arms to both sides can only add to the bloodshed and the suffering, and you are likely to end up with a situation a bit like Somalia, where the regime controls certain areas, some areas, and the opposition control other areas, and there's a good deal of instability and continued fighting and continued radicalization of the opposition, with those jihadist elements coming more and more to the fore, because after all, these are receiving backing from both Saudi Arabia and also Qatar. I think one of the worries is that there's no reason to believe that that this crisis can be contained within the borders of Syria itself. You're already seeing an impact elsewhere. I think you're seeing an impact on Lebanon most immediately, but also on Iraq. I think the current attacks by Sunnis on Shia targets is quite closely linked with Syria. There are problems in Turkey, on the Turkish side of the border. It's a very there's a risk that if the regime get desperate enough, they will raise the stakes with Israel. So it's not a situation that anybody who wants there to be stability in the Middle East can be complacent about. My impression is that the economic pressures on the press are inimical to in-depth coverage. Also, the public like simple, straightforward stories, in the sense that they like a story which has got a good guy and a bad guy, and a white knight and a black knight. And if you're trying to tell a story which is about shades of grey, or a plague on both your houses, that's not a very attractive story to tell. I think there should be more emphasis not just on rather uncritical reporting of horror stories directed at one side or the other, but on what can be done about it, and what is the position of the international players, and why aren't they doing more to stop it. I don't mean in terms of military intervention, I mean in terms of diplomatic action, and more analytical reporting. There is some, but I think there's not enough, and the effect very often is to push politicians in Western democracies into doing unwise things, because they're responding, or they feel they're responding to public pressure. And of course, it's a difficult story to tell, because it may sound like you're being soft on the regime. So there's not probably very much, I mean, especially in a short news bulletin, there's not much scope for looking at how things were, and is it ever going to be possible to get back. And of course, one of the problems with this kind of conflict is that once these compromises and arrangements that have worked very well for hundreds of years get disturbed, it's awfully hard to go back and reinstate them. That's why there's so much pessimism about things going forward in Syria, because it's gone. You know, it's all changed. Mixed neighbourhoods aren't mixed neighbourhoods anymore. People are terrified for their lives and their futures. You know, neighbours who had slightly different customs from them but were friends and neighbours are now enemies or potential enemies, or certainly people that you have to be very suspicious about. How do you get over that?